E aí, pessoal, tudo bem? Hoje nós estamos fazendo mais uma lição do Revisa aí em inglês, viu? Nós estamos gravando hoje. Na semana que vem a gente estará ao vivo. Então, acompanha a gente, já se inscreve no canal, compartilha esse vídeo, porque hoje nós vamos falar sobre a aliança eterna. Em inglês, The Everlasting Covenant. Preparados? Bom, primeiramente eu quero agradecer a sua presença. Obrigado por você estar nos acompanhando. Estaremos juntos aqui até o final do ano, pelo menos às sextas à noite, trabalhando com a lição em inglês. Você já deve estar acompanhando aí pelas redes sociais, tanto no Instagram como no YouTube. Nós estamos promovendo a lição em português, espanhol, inglês e agora nós estamos trabalhando com o público surdo-mudo. Nós estamos divulgando a lição em Libras. Tá muito legal, viu? Já já a gente mostra mais detalhes dessa novidade para vocês. Vamos começar com uma oração e depois dessa oração nós vamos começar a lição em inglês propriamente dita. Querido Deus, obrigado, Senhor, por mais esse dia. Obrigado por estarmos juntos para estudar essa lição maravilhosa. Pedimos uma bênção sobre cada um de nós, sobre aqueles que nos acompanham e que o Senhor nos abençoe. Em nome de Jesus. Amém. Let's go! Everlasting Covenant, Sabbath Lesson. Memory text. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. Genesis 17:7. In Sabbath, the introduction of our lesson, in the book of Revelation, there is an important passage that talks about the everlasting gospel. In the chapter 14, verse 6, we read, Then I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, through every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. Well, in this passage on Revelation, we can find the expression everlasting gospel. This means that it always existed, and more, we can find its origins in Genesis 17, our memory text, Isaiah 24, Ezekiel 16, and Hebrews chapter 13, with the expression everlasting covenant. Wow, but what kind of connection is there in between them, this everlasting gospel and everlasting covenant? The essence of gospel is the essence of the covenant. God, out of His saving grace and love, offers us a salvation that we do not deserve and cannot possibly earn. And we, in response, love Him back with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, with all our strength. Mark chapter 12. This week, we will look at the idea of the covenant expressed in the book of Deuteronomy, where the covenant and all that it entails, it made manifest. Muito bem, vocês perceberam que eu fiz uma conexão com o livro de Apocalipse, né? Muito legal, que lá diz a expressão Evangelho Eterno e aqui a gente está falando sobre aliança eterna. E existe essa conexão porque a essência de um é a essência de outro. Beleza? Vamos então para a lição de domingo, Sunday Lesson. The idea of covenant exists before Israel. For example, the covenant with Noah. Do you know? What is the importance of that? If the central truth of the covenant was God's love and His care for His children, the gospel reveals the same purpose. Only by God I can reach my success. In other words, the salvation is by faith alone, is exclusive, is unique. As the justice was credited to Abram when he believed in God's promise, as we can do the same. After all, this theme echoes throughout the Bible. When Paul wrote to Galatians about the deeds of the law, many of us thought about obedience as the only way to receive the righteousness. In fact, our deeds shows our faith, but Jeremiah tried to show the spiritual aspect of the covenant. This point caught my attention in Sunday's lesson. He wrote about God. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. Jeremiah 31:33. This is a symbolical message as well, a spiritual message. So the spiritual aspect between the covenant and the gospel is very important to understand the lesson of this week. Em português, você percebeu que na lição de domingo a gente mostrou um verso de Jeremias muito interessante, porque ele fala que Jesus vai escrever a sua lei, mas não em tábuas, não em papel, não num tablet, nem no smartphone. Ele vai escrever na nossa mente e no nosso coração. É óbvio, essa é uma linguagem simbólica, mas revela um aspecto espiritual, não é literal. Ou seja, o aspecto da aliança, que envolve um aspecto literal, que Deus quer estar conosco, também envolve o aspecto espiritual, porque Ele quer estar conosco se relacionando, se conectando com a gente, tá bom? Monday's lesson. God worked for Israel despite the constant mistakes. And it was because of the promise made to the fathers that God's grace was given to their future generations. In Exodus chapter 2, 6 and Leviticus 26 tells the remembrance of God with Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. And the lesson for us is, even before the beneficiaries of the covenant were born, the promises were made in their behalf. Thus, through no merit of their own, they received the promised deliverance, which God did for them through the miracles and events of the Exodus. So, I finished Monday's lesson with the verse that opened this day. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart. Only God has a pure heart. When we can claim the promise to us, but only by the merits of God, the covenant will be fulfilled. Em português, vocês perceberam que eu tentei trabalhar a ideia de que a aliança ela veio antes, ou vamos dizer assim, os méritos, os benefícios da aliança, elas vêm antes dos beneficiários, tá bom? Então, essa é a ideia da lição de segunda-feira. Agora, nós vamos chamar os nossos amigos, o Arthur e depois o Igor. Arthur, vamos lá, lição de terça-feira.
Oi gente, tudo bem? Muito legal estar aqui com vocês mais uma vez. Agora a gente vai estudar a lição de terça-feira. Tuesday's lesson is called the Book of the Covenant, which is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is known as the Book of the Covenant because that is the central subject of that book. It's impossible to talk about the covenant without talking about Deuteronomy. That covenant included, and also still includes, laws and promises. According to Moses, the covenant was actually even written in stone. We can read in Deuteronomy 4:13, so he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 Commandments. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. Well, as we mentioned, the covenant wasn't just the 10 Commandments. It wasn't just the law. It was also about promises. And among those promises, one was very special. The one that was first made to Abraham and then to Isaac and Jacob. We can read that one in Genesis 12:7. It's God talking to Abram. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And how many generations later, here in Deuteronomy, the children of Abraham are standing right before, at the door of that promised land. And it's in that moment Moses tells them, "The Lord did not make this covenant with your fathers, but with us, those who are here today, all of us who are alive." Deuteronomy 5:3. That's very interesting because actually God tried. He did try to make that covenant with the fathers of that people. Their fathers were the generation that 40 years earlier had rejected over and over God and His love and His words and His covenant, and because of that they weren't allowed into the land the Lord had for them. God had tried to make a covenant with His people at Sinai, but they unfortunately did not commit. They didn't want it. But once again, now with the next generation at Moab, God through Moses tries to make a new and at the same time old, because it was the same covenant. Same laws, same promises, same requirements, same blessings, same relationship. But once more, God was reaching to His people, calling them. And that's why the book of Deuteronomy is so important when we're talking about covenant. Covenant is the main subject of the book of Deuteronomy, as well as the story of a God reaching out once and again to His children.
Obrigado, Arthur. Foi muito legal, muito interessante. Essa lição foi muito show, hein? Agora vamos chamar o Igor. Vamos lá, meu amigo. Diz pra gente aí como é que tá a lição de quarta-feira.
Olá pessoal, eu sou o Igor e nós vamos tratar aqui da lição de quarta-feira dessa semana. When it comes to covenant, we can see in the Bible that God wanted His people, the Israelites by that time, to be different from others around them. And this principle is applied even today. We are His special people. Looking back, notice there were many smaller pagan nations that lived in the same area as Israel did. These people were steeped in paganism, polytheism, and some utterly degrading practice, which included child sacrifice. Through the history of ancient Israel, the Lord had warned His people against following the practice of the nations around them. God had called out His nation for a special purpose. By having entered into the covenant with God, they were to be a special people, a witness to the word of the God who created the heaven and the earth, the only God. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 16 through 19, the Bible says, "The Lord your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in obedience to Him, that you will keep His decrees, commands, and laws, that you will listen to Him. And the Lord has declared this day that you are His people, His treasured possession, as He promised, and that you are to keep all His commands. He has declared that He will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations He has made, and that you will be a people holy to the Lord your God, as He promised it." Moses is telling them that they need to commit at this very moment again to be faithful, holy, and a special people, which is truly the central reason for their existence as the covenant nation. Just as God acted that saved the people of Israel and chose them because He loved them, it was expected that the Israelites would respond and out of love choose him over all their other gods. That choice involves allegiance only to him and to the different way of life. The Hebrew word kadosh, holy, means to be set apart, that is, to be different, unique, just as God is unique. To be holy does not refer to a static quality, to be perfect as God is perfect, and to be a saint. By calling his people to be kadosh, that means holy, God calls Israel to be his people, to be separate from the other peoples for a special relationship with him. To be holy is therefore an important element in the covenant. And because it is not a static quality, it is a dynamic and always present and relevant. To be holy is not something we inherited from the past because our patriarchs and pioneers. To be holy is a demand that concerns the present us today. The present truth is repeated again and again in the book of Deuteronomy precisely because we are called to be today his special people.
Obrigado, Igor. Thank you very much. This was so very nice. So, Thursday lesson, to complete our lesson, other images. This lesson is closely connected to Monday's lesson that talk about the covenant in Israel. Now it's time to see other images used in Deuteronomy to help portray the same idea. So the author works with 6 passages to demonstrate it. Deuteronomy 8 verse 5, the Lord disciplines his children. Deuteronomy 14:1, do not cut yourselves or shave the front of your heads for the dead. Deuteronomy 32:6 and verses 18 to 20. God is our creator, gave us life. Very important. And so the second part, the second question of this day, Deuteronomy 4 verse 12, God took them out of Egypt and brought them to the promised land. They are his heirs. And the sixth passage, Deuteronomy 32:9, Israel is his heirs. The author completes this lesson making a parallel between Jesus and all these images found in Deuteronomy. After his resurrection, Jesus asked to the 2 Marys to tell about him to his brethren. Even as the resurrected Christ, he referred to the disciples as my brethren, who certainly didn't deserve it. This is the essence of God in his covenant. Even though we fail, God doesn't give up on us. Meu amigo, muito obrigado. Você percebeu que a lição ela tentou dar a ideia de que Deus, apesar das nossas falhas, apesar dos nossos pecados, Ele nunca desiste da gente. E aí, aprendeu um pouquinho? Já estudou sua lição? Meu amigo, eu estudo a lição. E você?